Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Henry Stever, and I'm the President and CEO of AGB, the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin today's discussion, I want to thank Lynn Pascarella, the President of AAC&U, and Brandon Bastide, the President of Kaplan University Partners, for their partnership for supporting this series of webinars. Thank you, Lynn and Brandon. Today's webinar is part 3 in a 6-part series focused on bridging the gap between college education and workforce readiness. One quick logistical note for our participants today: please enter any questions in the chat feature, and we will work to address them as we progress through the conversation. So to frame the rationale for this series, many in society are questioning the value of higher education. For example, one study discovered that only 35% of college graduates feel their studies prepared them for the workforce, and another study discovered that only 13% of US adults feel college graduates are prepared for the workforce. So to discuss the topic of today's webinar, workforce readiness defined and measured, getting stakeholders on the same page, I am pleased to be joined by 3 exceptional leaders. The first one is Amanda Gould. Amanda is the Vice President for Learning Innovation at Bay Path University. Thank you, Amanda. The second is Michael Sorrell. Michael is the President at Paul Quinn College. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. And the third is Horacio Valeris. Horacio is the CEO of Frontier Global Partners, and he's also the rector or the board chair at Virginia Tech for their Board of Visitors. And he's also a member of the AGB Board of Directors. Thank you, Horacio. Thank you all for joining me today. So to frame the topic of today's webinar, when hiring managers evaluate candidates for employment, many evaluate them across 2 broad areas: competency and compatibility, i.e., can this candidate do the job, and can this candidate work well with our team? Further, many employers also think about learning as a lifelong journey that includes an ongoing life cycle, starting with theoretical learning, followed by application, and then followed by a period of reflection of the intersection of theory and application to continuously elevate the performance of the individual themselves and of the team and of the organization in which they are employed. So let's get into the conversation. The description on today's webinar declares that we are, quote, at a time of profound economic and democratic disruption, end of quote, and infers that our colleges and universities need to address these changes to prepare their students for what is already a new world of work. So Michael, as the longest serving president of Paul Quinn College, which is a private, historically Black Methodist college in Dallas, Texas. And by the way, I know down in Dallas, you're a little chilly today and over the last few days. I hope you keep yourselves and your staff and teams safe. But anyway, thank you for your leadership, because over the last couple of years, your institution was named the HBCU of the Year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So Michael, a 3-part question. Number 1, how would you describe the economic and democratic disruption that is impacting higher education? Number 2, in broad strokes, how do you think higher education should address these disruptions? And number 3, how has Paul Quinn College addressed these changes in its strategies, initiatives, and programs? Sorry for the short, easy question out of the gate.
Yeah, I mean, you took me back to law school, okay? I haven't had to answer questions with that level of complexity since then. So first of all, thank you for the question. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm a big fan of the work that AGB does, and just think that these are important conversations to have. Listen, I'm actually in the process of writing a book right now that talks a little bit about what we are dealing with. It's hard to look at the state that our country is in, right? We have 45 million people in poverty. We have a government that is badly fractured along the lines of partisanship. We have a country where people are at odds with each other because of just the inability to trust each other and believe in a common good. It's hard to look at all that and not think about the role that the educational systems have played in creating this situation, right? I mean, the majority of the people who are responsible for what we are seeing play out nationally and regionally all went to schools of higher education, primarily in this country, right? Came up through K to 12 in this country. So something we are doing isn't working. And we have to take ownership of that. And so when we think about it, it reminds me of sort of the approach that we take at Paul Quinn. We think that as institutions of higher education, we must turn ourselves outward and address the needs of the day, right? Address the needs that our communities have. And sometimes those needs are going to be outside what we think of as our sweet spots as institutions, right? It's going to require a more of an activist approach than an intellectual approach. We do that by the creation of the Work College. We did that when there was an issue with providing COVID-19 testing, and we became a testing center, right? Tested thousands and thousands of people all summer long. It is important that higher education recognize that we have a responsibility to speak to the needs of the day, and our institutions need to do that. So I think most importantly, we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to recognize that we're uniquely qualified to do it in this moment of time. And then we're going to also have to make peace with the fact that it's not going to make everyone happy, right? Because folks are so entrenched into their divisions. And the folks that speak truth to this divisiveness aren't going to be popular all at the same time.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. And the first step in any kind of, I'll call it therapy, is acknowledgement and listening and understanding. Doesn't mean you have to agree all the time, but as part of this is understanding and listening to what others' views are so that we can evolve. Thank you so much. And congratulations again for your leadership down at Paul Quinn.
No,
Amanda, I'm going to turn next to you. Amanda, as a cabinet member for a private university that offers all women undergraduate programs and graduate programs for both men and women, what are your thoughts on the current environment that higher education should address, or call it may address? And how does Bay Path University address the current environment? And any perspectives that you have on what Paul just shared with us, or excuse me, what Michael just shared with us?
Great, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and participating in this important conversation. I think that higher education really has an opportunity right now to be a conduit, to really bring opportunity, economic development opportunity and work-based experience growth to pockets of our country who are really being most impacted by the pandemic and other circumstances, and women are among those most heavily hit in some cases, trying to care for their children, doing the homeschooling. They're in the industries that were so much impacted by a lot of the circumstances going on in our country right now. So through our work at the American Women's College and through Bay Path University specifically, we've really wanted to focus on making sure that the learning experiences that our students are getting are work-based, that there's a meaningful application of skills, and that we're using technology to give them the opportunities to articulate those skills in a meaningful way. We're in an industry that has used a degree as a proxy in many ways for many years for a certain level of knowledge and entry into employment, but we have so many more opportunities now to think about how to demonstrate mastery, collect evidence of our learning, practice and in virtual environments, build portfolios, and give our students the tools they need to really articulate how they advance through a lifelong journey of skilling and upskilling and reskilling, because the working world is going to be evolving constantly. And so as we think think about packaging our learning experiences in smaller, more affordable ways, having milestones for our workforce to be able to seek employment and progression in their employment, and having employer partners think about helping finance those changes and over a lifetime. So one example at BayPath that I can speak to specifically is through a grant we received through the Strata Education Network. And it's very much focused on the field of cybersecurity, an industry that grew rapidly in a very short period of time, is in high demand, but there's a tremendous skills gap that can't wait for that education to career pipeline to catch up. And so there's many opportunities for adult learners, for example, who are underemployed or unemployed, to upskill, to reskill, to apply experiences from other industries in order to get into the field. But that requires a dialogue of education providers such as ourselves with employers to remind them that there aren't easy entry points, that the types of experiences they're looking for, they may need to fill by thinking creatively or outside of the box, that they have to be willing to think about what are the baseline skills of entry, and then what can we train on the job? How can we co-requisite learn and apply learning in the workplace together as partners? And so I think employers really need to reimagine what are the competencies, how do we adapt together and evolve to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our communities and our employers in our communities, and how are we really building, a dialogue so we're adapting together, because things just are evolving too quickly for us to do it alone.
All right, thank you, Amanda. Appreciate it. A lot of nuggets in there that you shared that resonated strongly with me. We can come back to them in a second. I want to get through Horacio, a question for him, and then also address one of the questions from the audience. So Horacio, as a business executive and as a board chair, or at Virginia Tech, you're called the rector of a large R1 public university. What are your thoughts on how the current environment is shaping higher education, how Virginia Tech specifically is adapting to the changing environment, and also any reflections on the comments from Michael and Amanda? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. And this is a subject that could take up hours if, if we wanted to. I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, but I agree with what Michael and Amanda said, particularly some of the comments Michael made. For the last 12 plus years, we've been running in this country what I would call, and this is personal opinion, some of the most regressive policies that we've ever seen in our lifetimes. Things like zero interest rates, massive borrowing, have been exacerbated by the pandemic and shutdowns of economies, to really create this effect that Michael talked about, which is a lot of people in the lower middle class and lower classes really suffering in this environment. And universities really can play a unique role, because there's a significant benefit that people get obviously from getting a higher education degree. And so in that area, a lot of what we have been devoting our efforts to at Virginia Tech is making sure that we have the resources, whether from the state or from private sources, to help students from those demographics end up with a university degree without the massive debt load that we are seeing throughout the country. So more resources is an area, whether it's capital campaigns or going to recruiters and firms that hire our students to contribute towards their education. The second thing that we're focusing on, which also goes to what Michael and Amanda talked about, is this polarization in the country. We have over the last years, from both extremes, we've seen a lot of people yelling at each other rather than discussing, and we believe that universities can play a great role in fostering really what is an honest appraisal of all viewpoints, and help get to the truth on many of these subjects. Whether it's we want to play the role of convener, and so through our principles of communities, through hearing diverse voices, through making sure they have places to to express their opinions, and through making sure that we don't really shut down anybody, but rather encourage sensible discussion, we think we can help get us through this period, which really has been fairly traumatic for all of us.
Thanks, Horacio. Appreciate it. As you know, being part of AGB, that building communities or leveraging your capacity to convene around communities is something that we talk a lot about as well. I want to turn the panel real quick to one of the questions. I'll just call this question from Meg. Keep you anonymous, Meg. But anyway, I'm going to address it to first, probably to Amanda. And the question, Amanda, goes like this. With limited resources, if building or rebuilding an institution's career readiness infrastructure, where would you advise the first priority or core of the initiative go to? Another part of her question is, our institution is looking at developing a multi-year approach, and of course, different stakeholders see different priorities. Any guidance that you can provide would be appreciated. So Amanda, why don't we start with you, since this seems to be right in square in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, thank you. You know, career readiness can take so many different angles. And so to kind of boil it down to a core or first priority, you know, in my mind could go a few different avenues. But I think for me, I would suggest at this point, thinking about the ability with technology today to think about skills mapping. It's a relatively easy method with partnership with certain, you know, providers, or even with free tools out there, to think about what's being posted in job descriptions. What are the specific skills, both soft skills and hard skills for your academic programs and the careers you're leading to? And then what's the content of your syllabi? Are you meeting those? Are you fulfilling, you know, the actual skills themselves in the delivery of your education? And then what are the soft skills that are absolutely essential to your academic programs? And many of them are the same in this liberal arts kind of moment. And I know we'll get to some of that content as well, but thinking about how do we go beyond just the technical skills and think about the human skills that are going to really help industries evolve as they think about the complement of technology with ability to share intellectual dialogue and to convey information in digital formats and collaborate in virtual environments. You know, what are the things that you should be augmenting? Content can be gained and knowledge can be gained from at your fingertips anywhere these days. So what are the additional skills that really make a college readiness program at your organization? And are you paying enough attention to those, is how I would recommend.
Well, when you mentioned skills mapping, something that I've done in my past, and I know a lot of people do, and it's, but also I would add on to that, not just the skills mapping to jobs, but also kind of aligning to employers that you've historically worked with or may want to work with in the future. And we'll get into partnerships a little bit later.
Henry,
Michael, or
yeah,
you want to jump in?
Yeah, let me jump in and say this. I also think that it's important to understand exactly where your students are, right? Like, I think looking at this in a multi-year approach is absolutely the right way. But you also have to understand, are you dealing with students who have just graduated from high school, or are you dealing with adult learners, right? Because those represent two very different pathways. So for example, if you are dealing with students who just graduated from college, and we are an urban work college, like we created this model. You come to Paul Quinn and you get a job. You work 15 or so hours a week. These are substantive jobs. You know, maybe your first one is on campus. After that, you go to work off campus in corporate internships that we arrange. Well, if you're taking an 18-year-old student, the first thing you have to do is immerse them in technical training, right? Which can be, do you know Excel? Do you know PowerPoint, right? Like simple things like that, that turn out not things that all high schools teach, right? Not at the level that you're going to need them to be successful in internships. But then there's an entirely different set of skills you have to teach, which we'll call the emotional intelligence and maturity skills. You know, what does it mean to go to work every day in an office place? What does it mean to function in an environment where, you have to learn to generate relationships. And how do you deal with students who already are going to feel a bit insecure about being there, right? So how do you buy them time and preparation to be able to successfully complete? Now, if you're talking about adult learners, then you've got to factor in life, okay? I mean, in things such as this, if you're going to work on skills, well, they also probably might have family obligations. So, one of the things that always fascinates me is schools that don't understand that the offices that help run the school need to be open after 5 o'clock, right? Like if you have adult learners who are working, then the registrar's office needs to be open after 5. The tutors need to be available after. I mean, like you have to have a support system that allows them to do that. So even when you're talking about skills mapping and all of that, effectively what you're doing is you're running the college 24/7. And that's a different model. It's a different understanding. And then the last piece of it is you can't bankrupt people providing them all these things. And providing them all these things happen to be pretty expensive. So, we, through the work program, it allowed us to reduce our tuition fees and all that. And so we created a pathway where people can graduate with less than $10,000 of debt. And we're working on getting it down to under $5,000 of debt. But all of those things come from just a very basic place, which is acknowledging the students you have in front of you and not romanticizing their lives or the students that maybe you wish you would have, right? I mean, it's different, and you have to meet people where they are and not
Well,
make
thank you for
them
that.
feel bad about that.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. It's acknowledging and understanding where they are in life, because 18 is different than 28 or 38 for sure with a family. Horacio, anything you can want to share on this topic before we continue the discussion from
Now
Virginia Tech or elsewhere?
we'll hit other things as we get on with the discussion. I'll leave this one.
Okay, good. This is great. We could have a whole conversation about acknowledging students where they are, for sure. All right, so the next part of the kind of discussion starts with a couple of authors and people that you may have heard of for the audience. The first person, her name is Kathy Davidson. Kathy wrote a book called The New Education, and she's a professor currently at CUNY, and she used to be a professor at Duke University. And she argues that to prepare students for this new era in which change is the only constant, colleges and universities need to emphasize creativity, collaboration, and adaptability over expertise in order to kind of abstract the discipline in which they're engaged in. More specifically, she advocates that the faculty, and there was a question we had, and I'm going to get to you, Horacio, about this question about how faculty can weave in workforce readiness beyond just the classroom, but she advocates that faculty present their students with multidisciplinary real-world problems and teach them not just how to think, but how to learn. So that's Kathy's perspective. Another person that you probably heard of his name is Joseph Aoun, and he's the president at Northeastern University. He wrote in his book called Robot Proof, Higher Education in the World of Artificial Intelligence, that higher education needs to educate the new generation of college students to invent, to create, and to discover, to fill the needs in society in ways that even the most sophisticated artificial intelligence agent cannot. Seems pretty amazing there, pretty much of a stretch. But anyway, in Aoun's book, he lays out a framework for a new discipline that he calls humanics, which builds on our innate strengths and prepares students to compete in a labor market in which smart machines work alongside smart people. Pretty interesting concept. So Amanda, two-part question. I started with Michael with a three-part question, so maybe I'm getting tired here. So only a two-part question for you. Amanda, so I'm interested, first of all, to learn about your role as VP for Learning Innovation at Bay Path University. And do other colleges and universities have such a uniquely titled role, or is Bay Path on the frontier? So that's kind of the tee up. But really, more importantly, what are your thoughts on what President Aoun and Professor Davidson are advocating for? And it's okay to say I don't agree, by the way. We don't have to agree. But do you have any, unique experience that have addressed their perspectives? Floor is yours, Amanda.
Great, thanks, Henry. And of course, I want to take the bait and say, yes, BayPath is on the cutting edge, of course, and that we really are making a commitment to how do we think about learning in innovative ways in the world. So, you know, I have been very lucky the last many years at BayPath, really being at that intersection of systems and data and learning science and student success through grants through the U.S. Department of Education and the Strata Education Network, who've helped to kind of make investments in us thinking about our learning environment. And I'm personally modeling what it is you're describing from these authors in this very role, the intersection of machine learning with the human touch of how we think in the field of education about using technology and AI to make our educators even more able to scale and be as engaged with the learners as possible because of the access to so much information. So when we think about, you know, for example, at BayPath, we've invested in adaptive technology, and we've thought about adult learners, much like Michael has described, in thinking about who are our students and what do they need. And many of the adult learners that we serve at BayPath are coming with varied levels of preparedness, varied backgrounds, diverse, low income, you know, really thinking about how do we make sure if they're coming with a collection of credits they've, you know, collected here and there over a lifetime at community colleges or other types of experiences, how do we help them package it together in a meaningful way? And so the use of adaptive technology was in order to do on-the-fly remediation within the course, being able to personalize the intervention strategies for our instructors. They can see a learning map and where's the gaps where students really have to spend some more time so that they continue to be on the same page as their peers as they're progressing. And so that ability to use technology to be as high touch as possible and make sure that that personal engagement, that validation, those relationships, that's what gets students to completion, that we're spending our time on the right things. And so I absolutely think that we in higher education could even model this behavior better for our students and think more about ways that we can make things easily accessible, affordable, and ways that we allow them to navigate content, but really develop these types of practice, work-based experiences, projects, application, so that they can continue to grow in the learning space. So I think that there's a lot to be said about your reference to these articles and my own personal experience being a reflection of how it really can come together.
Great, thanks so much. Another topic we could talk a lot about, robots working alongside humans, and maybe you get replaced by a robot and become a super uber duper something or other. But anyway, another topic. Horacio, what are your thoughts? Of course, not of course, but for most people, they realize that Virginia Tech's been on the forefront of technology and innovation for a long time. What are some of your thoughts around what Davidson and Aoun have written about?
Yeah, well, I thought I could be provocative and say I disagree, but I always go back to what a friend who's been in higher education his whole life told me a few years ago, that we have an educational system that was built for the Industrial Revolution, and we're now in a digital revolution, and we have to rethink how we do things. With that in mind, I actually think that that the way to approach this is really the way that I'm very impressed by. 8 years ago we hired 6 years ago we hired Tim Sands as our president. The first thing he did was he laid out a vision which he called Beyond Boundaries, really addressing these areas and talking about the importance of interdisciplinary teaching and learning. And so over the last few years, we have built what we call destination areas, and everything from the brain to coastal mitigation to wealth in rural communities, all these huge problems that we as a society face, and that really need the efforts of people from all fields: health, engineering, humanities, business. And we put together these destination areas, and we're seeing a huge amount of interest from students who don't just want to come. They need the basic skills. They need to know, an engineer needs to know how to design something. A doctor needs to know, how to diagnose and things like that. But in so many places nowadays, technology is replacing or is faster at doing the same things we've been doing. Even in our firm, which is an investment firm, we're looking at AI as a way to help us pick stocks more efficiently, something we've been doing with people our entire lives. So these destination areas, these interdisciplinary degrees and programs, I think are the future if institutions like ours are going to be able to address these larger societal issues and to help with moving our society forward. And so far it's been pretty successful, and we've gotten a lot of faculty involved. It sometimes breaks down when you try to put it through the shared governance structure that many of our universities operate under. So one of my recommendations would be that we need to somehow not do away with it, because I think it's a crucial part of the way that we operate as universities, but adapted to the world that we're going to be facing over the next 50 years.
Thanks, Horacio. Michael, I want to turn to you real quick, or quickly. And first, I congratulated you at the beginning of this webinar as being named as Paul Quinn being named an HBCU of the year. I also know that you and your team have been recognized for many accomplishments over your 13 years at Paul Quinn College. So congratulations again. This is not meant to be an award ceremony for Michael and his team, but they certainly have done a lot. I'm curious to understand, kind of building on your question or your statement earlier, Michael, about recognizing students where they are in their lifestyle and life stages, et cetera. What is some of the, I'm going to call it leadership style principles that you embody, that you encourage your team to embody and embrace, so that when you develop your strategies for the future, not only reimagining Paul Quinn College, but also reimagining your graduates and how they can thrive in the future? What are some of your principles from a leadership perspective that you're willing to share with our audience today?
Sure. No, listen, we are a values-based institution, and we mean that in the truest sense of the word. So the first thing is we believe in transparency and authenticity. So every year I get up in front of the entire staff and I walk people through the entire budget, right? Where every dollar goes, why it's spent this way, give people an opportunity to ask questions. We do there. I do the same thing with the students. This is what we're proposing to charge. This is why we're charging it. And I do that after I've visited with the Student Government Association to get their feedback and walk them through it. We very much believe that no problem is ever solved, right? So we're just doing temporary solutions, all right? Because life is evolving, and the things that we have to be prepared for that. So you don't fall in love with your own stuff, right? Or, we try and be with their own genius, right? Don't fall in love with your own genius. Allow for the possibility that there will be people who can improve upon that. And so we're constantly asking ourselves, does this make sense anymore, right? And then we've created this system of values which allow us to really sort of just speak to it. So it's we over me. The needs of a community supersede the wants of an individual. We place a premium on not being selfish. And then the 4 L's of Quinnite leadership: leave places better than you found them, live a life that matters, lead from wherever you are, and love something greater than yourself, right? So did you leave a place better than you found it? And you can ask those simple questions. And then the last one is a character test. Choose the harder right over the easier wrong without apparent regard to self-interest. And again, we strike at the heart of selfishness. We think that selfishness destroys institutions, destroys societies, and that you must always be concerned and focused on the common good. And that's how I lead. That's how I've coached my team to lead. And then I also tell you when I messed up, right? So I don't sit there and pretend that I'm Oz behind the veil, right? And can never make a mistake. It is, hey, I messed this up and I acknowledge it. And now I'm asking you for an opportunity to make it right. And so that personal touch, we think, makes all the difference in the world.
Right. Thank you so much, Michael. That was really, really hit the heart for me. My kids in school, their teachers used to kind of reinforce the whole choose the harder right, or words to the effect. So that was great. I want to stay with me here, Michael. There was a question here about shifting responsibility of work readiness from the career department to the faculty or to the other staff. I came across a webinar, or excuse me, a TED Talk in my preparation. I believe it was from Stanford. In the class, I'm looking at my notes here, it's called Designing Your Life. And I don't know if it was required, if it's a required course, but it's one of their more popular courses. So at the end of the day, there's so much to learn, and we all are still learning. And should it be the faculty's job, Michael, to help people prepare for the workforce, or is it the whole community? And how do you shift the readiness responsibility from the faculty, if that's where it is, to others, so it's more inclusive versus exclusive?
Yeah, so I don't believe in silos and I don't believe in monopolies, right? So the faculty doesn't have a monopoly on teaching, right? Like, we all are in this together. Every minute that we have a student on campus, all of us have an opportunity to impute knowledge upon them. So when we talk about career readiness, that has to be, it's the same thing as retention, right? These are institution-wide goals. So for us being a work college, it's not just the faculty that's asked to prepare the students to work, because truthfully, the students come work in all of our offices, right? So staff has an equal input on how that student is prepared for work. The faculty has an absolute role. They are important, and I am not minimizing that, but I am expanding who gets to have an impact on the lives of our students. And I think that when you only expect one thing from one group of people, you miss the possibilities that a whole other group of people could provide. So we ask everyone to engage. We ask the entire institution to be responsible for it. And it works out beautifully because no one feels overwhelmed or overburdened.
All right, so a real quick question for you, Michael. Yes or no? Should colleges and universities require preparing for your life courses?
Yeah, I don't know why they haven't, right? So absolutely.
I mean, it's a yes or a no. Here's another one. As a father of 5, I've got 5 kids. My last one is half a semester away from graduating, so I'll be finished with 5 kids. I've often thought about, and I'll turn this to Amanda, from a workforce readiness perspective, I think all 5 of my children have leaned too much on me to help them understand how to write a resume, prepare for an interview, dress, whatever, preparing to go into that workforce. Amanda, what do you think about preparing for your life, or designing your life requirements for institutions?
I absolutely support it. I believe that it's absolutely
good. I'm going to have my son call you.
Yep.
Very well. Okay, let's continue on here. Let me look in the dialogue here real quick. I think we're good on questions. All right, next question here, kind of a tee up, and the first one goes to Horacio. So Horacio, we all know that our students are going to be entering a world of work that is much more diverse than in the past. It's just the way the world is, and whether it's the United States or elsewhere, and unhesitatingly more global as well. While student populations have diversified over the last several decades, board composition, senior leadership, and faculty, broadly speaking, not everywhere, but broadly speaking, have not kept pace with the diversification of their respective student bodies. So Horacio, as a member of AGB's board of directors, you're very familiar with some of the work we're doing around justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you're also familiar with the new board statement we're writing on this topic. So there's a 2-part question for you. One is, what have you learned through the journey that we've been on at AGB for the last year around justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what are some of the key takeaways and suggestions that you can share with our audience that boards, leadership teams, and faculty can be doing to prepare our students for a more diverse workplace?
Yeah, well, let me start by saying that, at Virginia Tech, we have actually been asked by companies and organizations hiring from campus that we needed to devote more effort to diversity, because while they loved our students, they didn't feel they were getting enough of a diverse experience. So we've been working hard on that over the last few years. Now, as an immigrant, because I came to this country, my parents moved here because of the opportunities that the United States offered relative to other places in South America. And having also lived in Europe for part of my adult life, I do think that this country offers tremendous opportunities to everyone that can take them. And I think that we as institutions have a duty, particularly public institutions, have a duty to offer that education to all the different, and I don't want to separate into groups, but all the different cohorts that we find, for example, within the state of Virginia. So we should be educating people from Appalachia. We should be educating people from the Norfolk area. We should be educating people from Northern Virginia. You get, people that are everything from first generation college students, Pell Grant eligible, to adult learners that, have, served in the military and now are addressing college. And, diversity to me means really creating an environment in which everybody feels welcome, everybody feels heard, everybody feels like they belong. Our motto of ut prosum, that I may serve, really strives to do that. But we as institutions have fallen short. And so we're dedicating a lot of effort to this. And I think the statement from AGB, to go back to your direct questions, I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that, I need to listen better. I need to spend more time listening to others that have diverse opinions, not so much time trying to convince them. We also know from academic research that diverse organizations do better than non-diverse organizations. And, I always tell a story. I was working for an investment firm in which we hired people all from one university. And we could have hired the most diverse in terms of sex and race, but gender and race, but they all thought the same because they were all coming out of the same organization. So when we put together our firm, we've looked for different experiences. And I think, this makes everybody's life richer. Going back to what Michael said, we need to instill in students a view that the diversity really enriches their lives. And that, that we can't live in a world in which we are isolated. Those days are long over. And I think we need to do better. I don't think our institutions of higher education have done well. So I'm happy to see this statement from AGB. I think it's timely, and I also think it addresses some of the things that board members need to look at. There are a lot of board members that will not ask questions about this because they're afraid of what it'll do to their position within their university, or they're afraid of how they'll be thought of. But I think that it's important for us to begin to think not only board members, faculty, students, staff, everybody, the entire organization. As Michael said, students learn from each other, so just as much as they learn from faculty, if not more. And that's what we want, because the jobs they're getting when they graduate are not going to be the jobs they're doing 20 years from now. And so if we don't teach them to deal with a very diverse world, we're not going to be successful.
Great. Thanks, Horacio. Michael, picking up on what Horacio was just talking about around DE&I, and it's in everyone's kind of job description, so to speak, to carry that torch forward. One of the things that we've written about, and I was one of the kind of leaders on this from an AGB perspective, in our initiative statement, it says at the very first sentence, it says, we aspire to a world where everyone is afforded the opportunity to be treated with dignity and respect. I personally think that's so easy. Give everybody the opportunity. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but give them the opportunity. So my question is, how do you, as the leader at Paul Quinn, and how does your team at Paul Quinn College prepare your students to embrace and collaboratively engage as team members in the workforce? And how do you think other colleges and universities should prepare their students to embrace and collaboratively engage as team members in the workforce?
Yeah, let me first of all say this. I think it is heartbreakingly sad that we have to even have these statements, right? I mean, what?
I agree with you, Michael. That's
Yeah.
why the first sentence is just afford everybody the opportunity to be treated with dignity and
Oh,
respect.
and
Let's
let me be
move
clear,
on. Let's train people. Let's build our economy and our society.
I'm not criticizing AGB in any way, shape,
Yeah.
or form. I'm saying that, like, we are now in a midst where it is in vogue to have these statements, to take this stance, to do these things. And what it begs the question of, well, what exactly were we doing before? Right? Like, I mean, if now we've got it, and we have to do it, right? Don't get me wrong, because clearly it wasn't being done before, right? And so I look at it, and with our students, we have an added concern, right? Because our students are coming from under-resourced communities. 85% of our students are on Pell Grants. And when you talk about diversity and inclusion, and first of all, let's separate those, right? Like, because I do absolutely think diversity is essential. Inclusion is very, very difficult, right? Because you're speaking to someone's heart, you're speaking to their institutional structure, and that takes time, right? And we don't know yet if we live in a society where people are willing to sustainably engage in this concentration, right? We just can't answer that question yet because it hasn't been going on long enough. But here's the thing. The only way we are really going to get to a diverse society is if we expand who we're looking at. If all you're doing is looking for the children of people like me to welcome into your institution or your companies or your environment, and that makes you feel as if you've achieved diversity, well, you know what? My kids have had the best of everything, right? They've gone to the very best schools. There aren't a lot of them. If you really want to create a diverse community, a diverse society, well, then you've got to speak to the fact that coming out of our public K through 12 schools, the majority of those students are coming from under-resourced and low-income families. So now you've got to address the fact that people are coming to you with the deficits and trauma that poverty has created, right? How are you going to speak to that? How are you going to give those individuals time to acclimate themselves? Because every day that you live in an environment where you haven't been able to fully develop without being concerned of just basic necessities, you're further behind. And so you compound that generationally. Well, now here's the challenge, right? Because if you really want to sustainably have diverse communities, then you're going to have to speak to the fact that it is going to take generations of time to really engage, develop, and embrace individuals different from yourselves. And historically, I just don't know if we've ever seen examples of that.
Well, thank you for your partnership along this journey. It's so important. I'm going to shift real quick over to Amanda as we round out this section of the discussion. Amanda, at Bay Path, how does you personally, or how does the curriculum at Bay Path University integrate the values of justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion into its strategies, plans, initiatives, and curriculum? Now, big question, I got it, but try to keep it to 1 to 2 minutes. Give us the essence.
Will do. Well, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the question and talk about what higher ed institutions can and should be doing to respond, because I think it's important for us to admit in some ways that the models in higher ed are inherently exclusive and built around principles of exclusion, and that the great debate about superiority of modalities and quality of certain modalities over other misses the bigger picture, that higher education really providers need to take responsibility for the student experience and all the things that Michael has described in his responses. That, ironically, in some ways, virtual learning environments actually give us more opportunity to reach more students or to meet them where they are while they're juggling their complex lives. And so how are we changing some of the barriers that are preventing them from being successful? How are we changing the script? And how are we responding to their life experiences? So one example that I would give is, we've been using learning analytics at Bay Path University to build a wraparound support model, meaning that we have the responsibility to be attentive to students and how they're progressing. Are they able to access their learning environments? Are they signing in? Are they meeting deadlines? Are they struggling with content? They're not likely to come to us to ask for help. So an important part of this diversity and inclusivity is making sure that we're delivering and being proactive and responding and providing the resources, not making them seek them out, not waiting till they fall through the cracks or they fail out or they have to just drop off because they're juggling the complexity of their circumstances. So embedding resources right into the classroom, doing proactive outreach that's triggered by maybe some data points that we've been collecting anyway and we could just utilize in order to drive activity. And to respond to your earlier question about preparing students for life and making that required, students who are in these kind of circumstances, they don't have time to do these extracurriculars and go visit the career center and try this experience on for size so you can talk about it when you're seeking out employment. The more you can embed in the curriculum, the more that you build into what is on their academic journey, you are ultimately helping them access it in ways that they would struggle to otherwise in order to be prepared and career ready. So I think that us being taking more responsibility and not expecting students to be able to navigate the complex world of higher education that we've created is a first step in really thinking about being inclusive.
That's great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Another topic we could talk a lot about. You used the phrase learning analytics. Access, deadlines, understanding, matriculation, and probably a lot of things. One of our questions from the audience, Anne asked the question, are there any specific tools your institutions are using to assess academic readiness and work readiness? Academic readiness and work readiness, and just maybe a little bit more about your tool, and then we'll hear from Michael and Horacio if they have aware of any tools that their institutions are using.
Yeah, so an example I can provide, and I've referenced earlier that we're using adaptive technology to really look at the mastery of skill acquisition. And so it does provide us a methodology of really assessing competencies. So on the academic side, that's one particular tool that we've used. As we think about other opportunities where students could be practicing skills, there are ways to do virtual interview practices and recording, getting assessments for portfolios that give you kind of a way to track very particular skill acquisition that can translate into electronic portfolios that employers could look at. There's ways to look at badging for skill acquisition. Prior learning assessment is a great way to think about what are skills that you're practicing every day that you need to articulate is the equivalent of a learning outcome in your course. And sometimes it's a matter of being able to articulate what you know and how you translate it into the work world. And I think that's the important connection.
Great bridge to my next question, and I'm going to ask Michael for his perspectives first. So Amanda just talked about the ability to articulate and to demonstrate. So you got to say it and do it in other ways, have the ability, the competencies. So I want to talk a little bit about partnerships, partnerships with other entities, whether it's other schools, governments, companies, local, across the country, things of that nature. Wondering if you have any examples that you're willing to share around how Paul Quinn College leverages partnerships to accelerate the learning and the workforce readiness of your graduates.
Sure. So our entire success is built in large part on our ability to partner with versatile institutions. So for example, we're in the process of creating a banking and finance major, which in part is because of a partnership that we have with JP Morgan Chase, which is the largest partner we have in our corporate work program. The corporate work program gives us real-time feedback into the preparedness of our students. So every intern, every student intern is an opportunity for assessment. It's how we know that we needed to drill down deeper in terms of the preparation in Excel and PowerPoint, because our corporate partners gave us that feedback. You know, one of the things that we do, you come to Paul Quinn, you get 3 different ways of proving your preparedness, right? First of all, you have your subject matter expertise, which is whatever you major in. Then you have 4 years of real world work experience and experiential learning through the work program. But each year, students get an opportunity to earn a credential, right? So, you know, the first one is Microsoft Office Word, right? They Microsoft certified. Well, that's because of the feedback that we got from our partners that all the students needed to have this information. So, you know, you graduate in 4 years, you have 4 different credentials that you can use, and we have the ability to assess your performance at each step of the way. So again, I don't think you can wait. You know, the pace of change and the margin of error is so slim, the pace of change is so rapid that you can't wait until people are seniors to figure out whether or not they learned what they were supposed to learn. You've got to know that instantaneously so you can course correct when the time is necessary.
Great. We're running out of time here, and I'd love to talk about this all afternoon. Horacio, I wanted to see if you can summarize in like 2 minutes or so what you've learned from Virginia Tech's partnership with Amazon to do the HQ2 project. It's not just a Virginia Tech project, it was the whole state of Virginia. But any key takeaways that you'd like to share with our audience as they think about workforce readiness in breaking down barriers, so to speak?
Yeah, the fascinating thing about Amazon selecting Virginia is that Virginia didn't offer anywhere near the highest tax incentives. What Virginia offered was a combination of reasonable tax incentives, about half of what New York offered, about a tenth of what Maryland offered, but combined with a tech talent pipeline, which was delivered through the universities of the state. In particular, for us, it was to build a new $1 billion campus in Alexandria that would focus on computer science, plus increase our computer science undergraduates by 2,000 a year. George Mason has expanded their graduates in computer science, and a few other universities in the state have as well. The key lesson is that workforce readiness drives the decisions of businesses. And you know, in Amazon's case, they could have had their choice of anywhere in the country. They could have their choice of a lot of tax incentives, but they actually, what drove them to select Virginia was the combination of education with incentives. Now, one of the things that we recommend to people, and I've talked to a lot of trustees, is there are a lot of companies on the move today, whether it's tax policies in their home states that they don't like, or whether it's workforce availability. So team up with your legislatures, come up with ideas of how to attract these companies to where you're based by putting together programs that can help them meet their workforce needs.
Thank you, Horacio. I know you and I have talked about this topic a lot, and but I think, you know, for our listeners, realizing that it's all about education and how can a state or an institution help the local communities advance their needs. All right, so we're going to wrap up here with the rapid fire. Stay with me, Horacio, since you're on the screen. At least I see you on the screen. What do you think are, in 30 seconds or less, what are your recommendations for our audience's key takeaways, and go do it if you can today?
Okay, well, I would say that use your budgets. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but set priorities, use your budgets. You can't be everything to everybody. So make sure you do what you're good at, and make sure that you express that through your budgets.
Good point. Do what you're good at. Don't try to fake it. All right, Amanda, what do you think? What are key takeaways and recommendations you want to leave with our audience today?
I would say that we don't have to imagine sole creation in all of our organizations, that we are living in a very digitally connected world now, and higher ed can use industry content, industry trainings. It can share and recycle accessible materials, use open resources. Think about what we can do to help facilitate the learning and help students articulate it and translate it to meaningful workplace skills, but we don't have to all be the sole creators.
Great point there, Amanda. Don't need to do it alone. It's all about partnerships. And then lastly, Michael, what are your thoughts on key takeaways, suggestions for our audience?
Oh, well, I think the key takeaway is, one, no problem is ever solved. We're in a stage of constant creativity. Big schools, small schools, each equally have great ideas, so don't have a bias towards one over the other. And I think institutions should be less in love with their traditions and more in love with their students. And if they do that, then they will find their way forward much, much easier.
All right, that's a great way to wrap up our conversation. Love your students more than, I think you said love yourself or something like that. But anyway, love your students. It's a great way to wrap it up. Well, Michael, thank you for your for the hour. Horacio and Amanda, thank you so much for your time. And thank you all out there in the audience. Appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions, they certainly can reach out to any of us, the four of us, and we're willing to help. Take care. Thank you so much.